School of Criminology. Classical School of Criminology. Now remember I said anything ending in ology means the study of? Mm-hmm. So what are we studying? Crime. Yeah, crime and criminals. Classical school. So the word school does not mean a bricks and mortar building like Delta College or your high school. In this perspective, we're looking at a school of thought, right? A way of thinking about things, a worldview. So the classical way of thinking about the study of crime and criminals. Our champion here is Cesar Beccaria, who wrote a very controversial publication in 1764 known as Essays on Crime and Punishment. Now the 1700s was called the Age of Enlightenment. It was a period of time when scholars and philosophers were starting to look at the way that things had been done up to that point in time and question it. And say, hey, you know what, maybe this isn't right, maybe we need to change things, maybe we need to do things in a different way. And this is exactly what Cesar Beccaria was doing. He was challenging the status quo. Cesar Beccaria advocated crime prevention. He said, yes, we need to use punishment, but the punishment is for preventative purposes, to make people not want to do it anymore, not just for punishment for its own sake, like we'd been doing. This was for deterrence. Let's prevent crime. Let's deter it. He said, oh, an accused person should be presumed innocent until proven guilty. Wow, that's wild and crazy. Well, it was back then, because back then you were guilty until you could prove yourself innocent. He said, no, this ought to be the other way around. Classical School of Criminology also focused on the concepts of free will and something called the hedonistic calculus. What's free will? Free will.
Make your own decisions?
Make your own decisions. In other words, you choose, right? You choose what you want to do. Who knows what the hedonistic calculus is? Okay?
That's when you put your happiness above all else.
Yeah.
Regardless of the outcome.
Yeah, a hedonist is a pleasure seeker, which pretty much describes most human beings. We're pretty hardwired for pleasure seeking. You know, what makes us happy right in here and now. And calculus, right? Math. I know, right? God, math. To calculate what will bring one the most pleasure and the least pain. So we're choosing what will bring us the most pleasure and the least pain. In other words, behavior is chosen based on personal gain. Behavior is chosen based on personal gain. Crime is deterred if the punishment outweighs any gain from the crime. If the punishment is more severe than the reward, the idea is you're going to do your little calculation and go, yeah, it's not worth it. Not worth doing it. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Cesar Beccaria said a whole lot of other stuff too, but we're not going to get into that in this class. Turn the coin over. Let's spin a 180 now. We're going to look at the extreme opposite view. This is called the positive school of criminology. In other words, the positive way of thinking about crime and criminals. Our champion here is another Caesar. But this guy here is Caesar Lombroso, and we're going to fast forward about 100 years. So now we're in the 1800s. We've got this gentleman by the name of Caesar Lombroso. And he says something exactly the opposite from Cesar Beccaria. He says criminals are born. Has nothing to do with choice. It's all about fate and not free will. Criminals are victims of their circumstances. They're born into crime, they're genetically hardwired. Not about choice. They're born to be bad, they're unable to change. Interestingly enough, another group called the atavists that spun off of the positive school of criminology kind of picked up that ball and ran with it for a little while. And they said, well, if that's the case, if criminals are born to be bad and unable to change, why, we should just execute the whole lot of them. Or, barring execution, we'll just sterilize them all so they can't spread their bad seed. So I think you can see the inherent dangers here in this particular perspective. The positive school of criminology focused on the study of criminal traits that predicted criminality. It was believed that you could look at a person, and just by looking at them and their body type, by taking measurements of them, you could predict whether or not they would be predisposed to criminal behavior. We had Sheldon's 3 somatypes. Maybe you've learned about that in juvenile offender or another class. We've got the ectomorph, who was kind of a geeky, skinny, nerdy guy, who was not very predisposed to crime at all because, well, he was just an introvert and very shy, and he wasn't going to do that. And then you've got the endomorph, who was kind of the jolly, chubby kind of guy, who also wasn't predisposed to crime because, you know, hey, he was just a laid-back, happy-go-lucky, good-time guy. And then you had the mesomorph, the athletic, muscular, strong, gregarious, outgoing, extroverted kind of guy who was most prone to crime. So you don't have to write this down, but this is the way it was thought of. Physical characteristics such as flat noses, large lips, strong jawlines, thick, coarse hair were all attributed to a person's propensity to commit crime because these characteristics were noted of persons who had already been convicted of crime, specifically prisoners. So here's the flaw in the school of thought. All of the research was done on prisoners, not on people out in the world.